Sometimes the road leads nowhere. Another load, another night shift. Should have been easy. But why wouldn't the smell of metal go away?
He's just a man, isn't he?
Vehicle 5-4, detour to 40th. The bridge has collapsed right in front of you. Oh my God, how is this possible?
What is this place? You can't find the third brother. He finds you on his own.
We're just entering.
They say the road never ends out here, crisscrossing the vast, empty stretches of the American Midwest. It's an old saying, one of those bits of folksy wisdom people throw around to fill the silence. But the more time I spend driving these roads, the more it feels less like a metaphor and more like a goddamn existential threat. The road doesn't end, the landscape never changes. And if you keep moving long enough, you start to wonder if you're actually going anywhere at all. Another long haul, another nameless town blurring past the reinforced windows of the transport truck. The same endless horizon, stretching in every direction like a faded watercolor painting, left too long in the sun. This is my life now. Foundation logistics. Not exactly the most glamorous side of the SCP business, but it pays the bills. It keeps me moving, and that's all I really need. I drive. I don't ask questions. I don't let my mind wander. Most of the time, the cargo is nothing special, at least not in the way you'd expect. Anomalies, sure. But inanimate objects, strange artifacts the Foundation can't fully explain, but needs to relocate from one secure facility to another without drawing attention. Things that might change shape when no one's looking or hum with an energy that doesn't belong in this world. They give each object a number, slap a handle with care sticker on the crate, like that actually means something, and hand it off to guys like me to move it. We're the garbage men of the anomalous, cleaning up after forces we don't understand, and we're not meant to understand them. You learn not to ask too many questions in this line of work. Compartmentalization, they call it. Keeps us grunts sane, or at least that's the theory. This time, though, the cargo was different. It wasn't an object. It wasn't something you could lock away in a box and forget about. It was a person, or rather, an SCP that looked like a person. SCP-1440. The old man from nowhere. That's what the manifest said, but manifests never really capture the truth of these things. Wade was humming under his breath, tapping his fingers against the dashboard, as oblivious as ever. Wade is, well, Wade. A good guy, a solid driver. Not one for deep thoughts, which probably makes him better suited for this job than I am. He takes things at face value, doesn't overthink the details, doesn't get tangled up in what-ifs the way I do. Part of me envies that. Maybe it's easier that way. I glanced in the rearview mirror, checking the secure compartment where our passenger resided. Level 2 clearance meant I only knew the basics. SCP-1440, human in appearance, classified as a low-risk anomaly. That alone was enough to put me on edge. I've been with the Foundation long enough to know that low risk means one of two things. Either they haven't figured out what makes it dangerous yet, or they have and don't want us to know. 5 years driving for the Foundation. 5 years since the accident. 5 years since I lost. No. It doesn't do to dwell. I've seen my share of weird. Objects that make you weep uncontrollably. Structures that rearrange themselves when you blink. Entities that mimic the voices of the dead. Strange, impossible things. But this was new. This was different. The pickup point was a remote outpost just outside of what remained of Red Rock, a town so small and insignificant it might as well have been a mirage in the endless prairie. The outpost, like most Foundation sites, was designed to be invisible. To an untrained eye, it was just another abandoned farm. Faded paint, rotting wood, a relic of the Dust Bowl era. But beneath the surface, it was something else entirely. By the time we arrived, the sun was melting into the horizon, the sky painted in hues of orange and violet. 2 men waited for us outside, a weary-looking researcher in a stained lab coat, and a security officer with a face like carved stone. Chief Tager. I knew his type, the kind of guy who took his job very seriously. Ramsey, Wade, he greeted us, his voice clipped and efficient. This is SCP-1440. He gestured to the old man standing beside him. That was the first time I really saw him. He looked fragile, skin like old parchment, stretched thin over a frame that seemed barely strong enough to hold him upright. Wispy white hair clung to his head in uneven patches. His clothes were simple, worn, the kind of thing you'd expect on an old drifter. He carried a sack made of rough, unfamiliar fabric, and inside I could make out the shapes of a deck of playing cards and a small plain glass cup. There was nothing obviously strange about him. He looked like any other elderly man you might pass on the street, lost in his own thoughts. Maybe waiting for a bus that would never come. Wade, ever the master of stating the obvious, muttered, "Doesn't look like much?" Tager shot him a withering look. Appearances can be deceiving. SCP-1440 is to be treated with the utmost caution. No unnecessary delays, no deviations from the route, and absolutely no prolonged conversation. Is that understood? Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. "Crystal," I said. My eyes flicked back to the old man. There was something in them. A weight. A sadness so deep it felt like it didn't belong to just one life, but many, stretching back further than I could comprehend. And then I noticed his hands. Not just still, clenched, knuckles white as if he were bracing himself against something unseen. Holding on for dear life. This wasn't a man scared of his surroundings. This was a man carrying something far heavier than any of us could see. Tager wasn't exaggerating. There was something about him. Something wrong. "Any questions?" Tager asked, his sharp gaze flicking between Wade and me, daring us to push for details. I hesitated. Just one question clawed at the back of my mind, refusing to let go. "Why the restriction on conversation?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "What's he going to do, bore us to death with stories about the good old days?" It was meant as a joke, but it came out wrong. Tense, uneasy. Tager's jaw tightened. "His anomalous properties are unpredictable," he said, his voice like a locked door. Limiting interaction minimizes the risk. That's all you need to know. Which meant we were on a need-to-know basis, and the Foundation had decided we didn't need to know much at all. We loaded SCP-1440 into the transport, a modified heavy-duty truck, built to withstand anything short of a missile strike. Overkill? Probably, but with the Foundation you never knew. The old man settled into the secure compartment without a word. There was an eerie calm about him, like someone who had been through this 1,000 times before. Like someone waiting for something inevitable. I hesitated before sliding the steel panel shut. For a brief moment our eyes met. He didn't say a word, but I swear in that split second I saw something flicker across his face. Not fear, not anger, just inevitability. I shut the panel. The sound echoed in the confined space of the cab, settling over us like a finality. And then we hit the road. No delays, no deviations, no conversation. Simple enough. At least that's what I thought. I was wrong. The first few hours of the drive passed in silence, broken only by the steady hum of the truck's engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Wade had started tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, a nervous habit he probably wasn't even aware of. The man was usually a chatterbox, filling the long, empty stretches of highway with his half-baked theories and bad jokes. But tonight, even he seemed to sense that something about this trip was off. I kept my eyes on the road, forcing myself to ignore the growing unease creeping up my spine. We were following the designated route, a seemingly random sequence of highways and back roads that snaked through the heartland of America. The Foundation had deemed this the safest path, though I had no idea what kind of logic they were working with. To me, it seemed like we were just making ourselves more noticeable, winding through empty roads where any passing driver would remember us. But I didn't question it. I drove. That's what I did. Then I smelled it. A strange, sharp tang in the air, metallic, like the scent of blood or the sting of a battery on your tongue. At first, I thought it was something outside, a distant factory or a field burning in the night, but the longer I inhaled, the more I realized it was inside the truck. It was faint but unmistakable, seeping into the cab like a slow leak. "You smell that?" I asked, breaking the silence. Wade frowned, sniffing the air. "Yeah, smells like burnt wires or something." Neither of us said what we were really thinking, that the smell was coming from him. I reached for the panel in the steel partition, hesitating just long enough for my gut to warn me against it. I ignored the feeling, pulling the panel open to get a look inside the secure compartment. There he was. The old man sat exactly as we'd left him, hunched slightly forward, his hands resting on his lap. His expression was blank, eyes staring at the floor, as if he hadn't moved a muscle since we shut him in there. But something had changed. The air in the compartment was thick, shimmering faintly as if the space itself was warped, like heat rising from asphalt. The metallic scent was stronger back here, almost overwhelming, and the longer I stared, the more I felt something wrong pressing against my senses. Something in the atmosphere had shifted. SCP-1440 lifted his head slowly, meeting my eyes through the small opening. And then the truck shuddered. A low, distant boom rolled through the air like thunder. A split second later, the steering wheel jerked in my hands, sending the entire vehicle into a brief, stomach-dropping sway. "What the hell was that?" Wade barked, gripping the wheel tighter. I snapped the panel shut, my pulse hammering in my throat. The radio crackled to life. "Transport, this is dispatch. Be advised. Structural failure reported on Highway 40. A bridge has collapsed 5 miles ahead of your current position. Rerouting you, now." My hands tightened around the wheel. That was no coincidence. That smell, the change in the air, the timing. I shot a glance at Wade, who was already looking at me, his face paler than before. "You think? It's him," I cut in. I didn't have proof, not yet, but every instinct I had was screaming it. Another boom rumbled in the distance, shaking the truck ever so slightly. This time it was further away, but no less unnatural. I reached for the panel again, sliding it open. SCP-1440 hadn't moved. He was still sitting there, still staring, still wrapped in that eerie, unnatural calm. But then, his lips moved. At first I thought he was just muttering to himself, but then his voice, dry and papery, like autumn leaves rustling across pavement, slipped through the steel barrier. The second brother, always quick to anger, always hungry. I swallowed hard. "What?" No response. The words hung in the air, fading into the metallic scent that lingered between us. Then, just as calmly as before, SCP-1440 closed his eyes and resumed his statue-like stillness. A chill rolled down my spine. I shut the panel. The tension in the cab had gone from uneasy to suffocating. Wade's fingers gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make the leather creak. "This is bad," he muttered under his breath. The truck rolled on, the road ahead stretching endlessly into the night, but something told me we wouldn't be making it to our destination without more interruptions. We weren't just transporting an old man. We were transporting a storm, and it was just getting started. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through the endless darkness. The cab of the truck was silent now, save for the occasional creak of the suspension as we rolled over uneven pavement. Wade had stopped talking. His usual easygoing demeanor had been replaced with something colder, more uncertain. I could see his fingers gripping the steering wheel too tightly, his knuckles white. We had both felt it. The shift in the air, the unnatural tremors, the metallic taste thickening in our throats. And we had both heard the old man's whisper, the second brother, always quick to anger, always hungry. I didn't know what the hell that meant, but I knew it wasn't good. The radio crackled again. "Transport, be advised. Additional anomalies detected along your route. Tornado activity confirmed near Elmwood, Kansas. Rerouting instructions incoming." Wade stiffened. "Tornado?" His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. Elmwood was barely 50 miles away. 2 disasters within the span of an hour. A collapsed bridge, a tornado. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. I could feel it now, an invisible pressure squeezing against the inside of my skull. Something was building, pushing against the seams of reality, and SCP-1440 was at the center of it. This is all connected to him. Wade muttered, finally voicing the thought we had both been circling around. The bridge, the tornado, it's him. It's gotta be. I exhaled slowly, nodding. Yeah. Wade shook his head, staring straight ahead. How? He's just sitting back there. He's not doing anything. I didn't have an answer, but I was starting to understand something that no one at the Foundation seemed to grasp. SCP-1440 wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. He wasn't some entity trying to destroy the world, and he wasn't using supernatural powers to summon disasters. He was a catalyst. Wherever he went, destruction followed. He didn't cause the disasters, he attracted them. And we were driving him straight through the heart of the country. I reached into the glove compartment, pulling out my notebook. My hands were steady as I flipped it open, though my pulse was anything but. I needed to track this. I needed to see if there was a logic to it, if there was a way to stop whatever was coming next. I scribbled down the time, the locations, the events. Bridge collapse, Highway 40, tornado, Elmwood, Kansas. Next, as soon as I lifted the pen, the radio cut in again. Transport, be advised. Industrial explosion reported near Wexler Steelworks, approximately 40 miles west of your current location. Multiple casualties reported. I dropped the pen. Wade let out a slow breath. You have got to be kidding me. We both knew. The bridge, the tornado, and now an explosion. Each disaster was getting bigger, closer. This was a chain reaction. SCP-1440 was unraveling something, pulling unseen forces toward him like a collapsing star. I turned and grabbed the panel covering the opening to the secure compartment, sliding it open once more. The metallic scent was so strong it burned the back of my throat. I coughed, forcing myself to focus on the figure inside. The old man was still sitting there, his posture rigid, hands clenched in his lap. His breathing was steady, but his eyes were locked on something beyond me. I followed his gaze. Nothing. Just the wall of the truck. But to him, there was something there. I swallowed. You know what's happening. SCP-1440 didn't move. You know what's coming next, I pressed, my voice quieter now, like I was afraid of disrupting whatever fragile balance remained in this truck. Tell me. At first, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then that dry whisper scraped through the air. The third brother. He waits. A chill wrapped around my spine. I didn't know what he meant, but I knew instinctively, deeply, that it wasn't good. The truck suddenly lurched. A sharp boom echoed in the distance, followed by a rolling tremor that sent shudders through the vehicle. Wade cursed, gripping the wheel tighter, fighting to keep us steady. What now? He snapped, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch. What the hell was that? Static. Then, seismic event detected. Earthquake reported near Junction City. Magnitude 5.7. Stand by for further. The signal cut out. I turned to Wade. His hands were shaking. That was 4 disasters now. 4 points on a map, each one bigger than the last, each one drawing closer. I didn't know how much longer we had, but I knew one thing for certain. We weren't just driving SCP-1440 across the country. We were leading the disaster straight to its next target. And if we didn't figure out how to stop it soon, there might not be anything left to save. The road stretched endlessly before us, swallowed by the creeping darkness of the horizon. We had stopped talking hours ago. Words felt useless now, drowned beneath the weight of inevitability. The air inside the cab was thick with an unnatural energy, humming with something just beyond human perception. It wasn't fear, not exactly. Fear was something you could fight, something you could resist. This was different. This was the slow, suffocating realization that no matter what we did, no matter how we tried to control it, something bigger than us was unfolding. The disasters had been accelerating, one after another, a relentless cascade of destruction, each event feeding into the next like dominoes falling in slow motion. The bridge collapse, the tornado, the industrial explosion, the earthquake, and then the last message from dispatch, garbled, broken by static, but still decipherable enough to send a wave of cold through my veins. Category 5 storm, formed over South Dakota, unprecedented, tracking directly. Then silence. No more instructions, no more updates. We were alone now, and we were heading straight for it. The Foundation had lost control, or maybe they had never had control to begin with. Maybe they had just been shifting the pieces around, delaying the inevitable, hoping no one would notice the cracks forming beneath their feet. SCP-1440 wasn't just an anomaly. He was something else entirely, a force of nature wrapped in the frail body of an old man. A walking apocalypse. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I realized this wasn't about containment. This wasn't about preventing disaster. This was about getting him where he needed to go. The convergence point. I didn't know what would happen when we got there. Maybe the disasters would stop. Maybe the storm would consume everything. Maybe the earth itself would split open and swallow us whole. But we didn't have a choice anymore. We had already crossed the threshold. The landscape changed as we approached. It happened so gradually at first that I barely noticed. The land became wrong. Shapes blurred at the edges, as if reality itself was unraveling. The stars above flickered, their light stretching and bending as if seen through water. The sky shifted in unnatural colors, deep purples and sickly greens that bled into the clouds. The air itself hummed. My hands clenched the wheel, knuckles white. We're close. Wade sat stiffly beside me, eyes locked on the road ahead. He had stopped questioning, stopped arguing, stopped doubting. He knew, just like I did. The old man sat in the back, silent, but he felt it too. This was the place, a place the Foundation had ignored, a place that had avoided detection, hidden within the cracks of existence itself. The convergence point wasn't just a location, it was a doorway. We crested a final hill, and there it was, a swirling, impossible vortex of color and shadow, its shape shifting constantly, defying the laws of physics, pulsing with an energy that felt ancient and alive. The road leading to it had ceased to exist. There was only empty space stretching toward a singularity that had no name. My breath hitched. We had spent the last 24 hours running from disaster, from forces we couldn't comprehend. And now, here we were, at the very source. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Wade swallowed hard. This is insane. I exhaled slowly. Yeah. And then the truck door opened. Not by me. Not by Wade. The old man stepped out. His movements were slow, deliberate, his frail form illuminated by the impossible glow of the vortex. I had expected something dramatic. Lightning, thunder, the ground splitting beneath his feet. But instead there was stillness, like the world itself was holding its breath. He turned to us, his eyes no longer weary, no longer lost. For the first time since I had laid eyes on him, there was something else in them. Purpose. The third brother is waiting, he said. His voice was different, stronger. I didn't know what he meant. I didn't think I ever would. He turned back to the vortex and took a step forward. The ground trembled beneath us. The sky rippled. The storm, which had been pressing at our backs, suddenly stopped, like it had been waiting for this moment. He took another step. The colors surged, pulsing outward in a wave of pure energy. And then, silence. The old man was gone. The vortex collapsed in on itself, folding inward until nothing remained. The storm dissipated. The land became still. And just like that, it was over. I don't remember how long we sat there. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Wade was the first to speak. Did we just save the world? I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside me since this all began. I don't know. I really didn't, because some things weren't meant to be understood. Some things just were. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing left of him, the small plain glass cup he had carried with him. It was warm to the touch, and for some reason, I knew that meant something. I just didn't know what. Not yet. I stared out at the empty horizon, knowing that somewhere, out there in the vast unknown, the Foundation was already watching, and I had a feeling they wouldn't like what they saw.